one of the things to consider with your Salton Sea layout is that there's different types of styles, and styles are very sort of easy to implement, but you have to understand where they come from to sort of have a consistency across your spread. So I just want to show you a few really sort of simple styles, where they come from, what it takes to sort of implement them. So this is a really basic 3-column grid that we're looking at here. And you can see there's a hang line up along the top, meaning that all of those pictures sort of hang off the hang line. They'll show up in the same place each time. The first column of each grid is sort of set for things like the headlines and pull quotes, things like that. We're looking at a asymmetrical grid or where everything sits in the same grid formation. So the left page and the right page are the exact same, which is can be interesting. And then you'll see a set of rules above and below. It's a little bit of overkill on this one just because you already have photographs over there, but I would imagine in some places in this publication they wouldn't. But it really this sort of style comes from really a very kind of dry news magazine sort of feel, using, that you can see the headlines are condensed, so very dry, but nonetheless it can still be a very beautiful type of layout. This really is an extension of that same style. So if you look at this one, they're really using kind of a broadsheet format, which is based from a newspaper. So with newspapers, everything is about letting the reader understand where they are in the publication. So you'll see this set of folios that run over kind of like this 3-point rule that goes all the way across the top. Then we're dealing with 5 columns of text. Everything is justified. All the photographs are as part of the grid. And then beyond that, they have a little bit of fun on the left-hand side with this kind of oversized slab serif. So it can be very beautiful and approachable, but it is based on kind of a newspaper sort of approach. Example of really what is a 6-column grid, but it introduces symmetrical sort of headlines. Starts with a symmetrical sort of page. So if you see the folios are up at the top, page numbers are centered, the headlines go right down the middle, all the subheads are centered. Even though the actual grid itself is offset, you'll see there's more room over to the left of the page on the left page. So everything is close to the margin. Interesting approach, and interesting that they went with the same sort of idea with the photographs. So instead of lining up the photographs, they've centered them down the column. Again, another sort of variation on the sort of newspaper approach. One thing that you really want to pay attention to in this one is look at how tight the grid is. So we're looking at basically the same grid format on left and right. So you have one column that is sort of dedicated to the headlines and things like pull quotes, and for the most part on the right hand page leaving it open. So this really is based on a newspaper sort of setup, but then what they're doing is they're running rules in between the lines, and they're making everything set left, and then they're using a rule system to divide the page. So if you look at how the pull quote has rules in between it, it ends up being a design system. And then on the right hand side, you can sort of see it's a variation. So we've switched from 4 columns to 5 columns. But look at how on the left page, look at how high the text goes to the top of the page. But because there's still breaks down the sides and in the margins, it works somewhat. I pulled this one because this really is kind of a hybrid of the ones we've just looked at. So it finds its kind of origins in magazine and newspaper design. So you can sort of see it's created these set of vertical rules that actually start on the right hand page, and it goes across, and those are used as reverse hanglines. So vertical hanglines, so you'll see the author's pictures in this one, then they use the next one to start the column, the headline, subhead, the subheads in the text, introduction, and text all fit within these rules. And you can see with the text rule, it only goes as high as the text goes. The one thing to look at on this one is look at how much white space that they've actually created here by using this sort of large headline and hanglines up at the top on both pages. For your article, yeah, you would end up probably with like a very long article, but yeah, really nice sort of white space on this. And you could have a variation where the text did go up to the top of the page. So it is possible to do something like this. And this is a great example of what sort of really tight typesetting can do for you. So this really is another variation. Again, I want you to pay attention to the system of rules that they've introduced here. So when we were talking about the Feltron sort of annual reports infographics, using a set of rules above, below, using rules to separate and divide your numbers works really well. In this case, look at the very tight grid that they've set up here with a fairly substantial margin along the outside of the grid, the bottom of the grid, and then tight to the top, and then using justified type and using, when you do that, you can have much smaller breaks in your content. And again, thinking about color systems, right? Green and black, and a system of rules. So, and then some really interesting sort of loose, sort of centered type down the side on this page. So creating a system, working within it, and then pushing hard to sort of stretch that system to be a little bit more interesting. So again, another variation of sort of having two sets of hanglines, right? So the first hangline picks up small headlines, small introduction, set of rules on both pages, and then everything after that sort of you can see the paragraphs start much lower, much tighter sort of gutters, or much tighter sort of margins around the bottom, but still kind of uses a visual system of rules. This is a great example of sort of building a 3-column grid that has the margins, larger margin to the outside, more space above, less space below, and then creates a series of basically 3 columns. And within those columns, they're very tight, using justified text, and then really breaking into the next column. So you can sort of see here what's happening is they're using these boxes to create the visual interest. So on the left-hand page, we see the first photograph really come from the top hangline, drops into 2 columns, then on the bottom leaves a space on the right for a caption, and then uses the 2 columns and then breaks out of those 2 columns. But because the grid is so tight, it creates a very nice composition. This is really an example of a simple 2-column grid that goes from top to bottom, but it really breaks up the information with a sort of large margin on the right-hand page, just set for little icons, little notes, and subheads. And on the left-hand page, completely treats it as an individual page. So that is something that you could absolutely consider. You do not have to necessarily have a grid that runs on every page. If you want to have every second spread, you might have a feature like this. And as long as you're sort of treating it with the same sort of style, the same design system, it can give you a real break, the same way sort of the large photographs in the Hakai magazine gave us a really nice break from all of the text. A really great example of creating content from what we're given. So you can sort of see that um, this article features this photograph with the A and the markers A1 to A6. And what they've done is created a design system that pulls it out of there, takes the A, puts it on the left-hand page. The indicators are from airports, and then runs a pull quote right over top of it. And you can sort of see that it's a very simple two-column grid, but sort of biting out chunks of the photograph, inserting sort of overlays and letter forms, gives it a really kind of nice industrial sort of feel that goes very nicely with the photographs, and a very sort of simple color system. And this one is really to sort of show you how a design system, so the design system here is fairly apparent. It's a series of sort of colored circles, very sort of tight 2 and 3 column grid. So the main editorial are fairly wide columns. Then there's secondary sort of information using a system of rules. For the most part, sort of hanging the photographs along the top, and then the text along the bottom. So it sort of shows you how consistency can really be key when you're working out a longer page format. So here's just an example of taking our story and building kind of a 3-column grid. It's really loose. I did this really quickly, so it's not great, but sort of taking the rule system that we've seen from some of those examples and just using information to knock out areas, right? So if we were just to run 6 columns all the way across this grid, it'd be really dense, right? So what I've done is I've sort of gone into a few of the numbers, tried to come up with a very simple color system, pull out some of the numbers, use a couple, really sort of simple icons, and you'll notice that those icons are very simple so that they don't have a very completely different looking style to the rest of the numbers. And then really keeping everything on a grid, so all the rules and numbers want to line up with each other. And once you realize that you are trying to line them up, but you're changing sizing and different sort of areas, it can work. And then the one thing to look about this one is a little bit less traditional. So knocked out this top area on the left side for these infographics, but then still went with a large pull quote beneath that. So really what we're doing is sort of knocking out sections to create visual interest, right? So it would be no different than if I decided, okay, so up along this area, I'm going to have a series of photographs. So I could, it'd be very easy just to sort of knock this out. And then basically what happens is, as we go through our layout, even though it's a very dense grid, in areas you have some very interesting areas that make it much more approachable, much more readable. So you'll sort of see everything is still built with a series of rules on here. Nothing really crazy about the grid itself. There's more space towards the to the middle, but it really is sort of then knocking out space where you need it. So the opposite of that is when you run out of space, you could easily take away this information and run these things right to the top, right? So if we say our hang line sort of starts here, what it does is it allows you to really establish how much space you actually need to fit this copy. So even though it's a very big and dense sort of 6-column grid, at times you can use it like that. But again, it's very easy then to pull some of the numbers, find images, that sort of thing, and create a layout that's much more interesting.